Just to give you a brief introduction, if you haven't met me before, my name's Simon Jones. I'm the Managing Director of the Libraries and Education Business Unit here at Civica. I've been around at Civica for a few years. I've been running the combined business of both libraries and what we do for schools for about the last year and a half. Just to give you a brief introduction to the day, you've got this in your packs, but you hear from me for a few minutes, then over to Marshall Breeding, Roberta, Sophie, and then over to Jeremy to show you the latest parts of the product. So to give you a brief introduction of the last year really for Spidus, looking at 2017 was just an absolutely fantastic year. We had a number of our large customers renew with us for quite a long time. So TAFE Queensland, the SELMS Consortia, Southeast Library Management System Consortia in the UK, the SMART Consortia in New Zealand, NLB, the National Library Board of Singapore, renewed with us just 2 weeks ago for a term of potentially 9 years, and consortium in southwest Perth, and also a new consortium growing out of the Albany Council in Western Australia. So really strong from that consortium perspective. And in fact, when we look at councils across Australia, it was quite humbling that pretty much every council that's been to market for the last year and a half for a library management system has chosen to partner with Civica. So we're really honoured, and it's sort of part of that. I'd welcome all of you. There's a lot of people here from Fairfield, a lot of people from Blacktown, new customers who travel down from Lake Macquarie, who are doing a really interesting sort of combined project covering the whole council ERP system and a digital transformation approach. We've got the Northern Beaches Council, so that's where I live. So that was quite pleasing to know that my local library will be using Spidus. Willoughby Council, just to mention a few, Oberon, Wollongong, Orange, Bathurst, Coffs Harbour. You've really, you've made a lot of effort to travel some distance to come and see us, so thank you very much. And then finally, from one of the new customers is from Willoughby is Kath Bright, who I understand has volunteered to take on the role of the New South Wales Spidus User Network Council. So thank you very much, Kath, and I'm sure everyone looks forward to working with you moving forward. So looking forward with Spidus, we can't rest on our laurels. We owe you a lot and we've got a lot to work on. So we put our strategic focus for 2018 on the following three areas. So one is innovation. We'll show you Spidus as an entire web product later on, and that is where things get really interesting. So everything's in the cloud and web-based. So then we start to ask you and work with you and understand what next. So we've done that big shift to the cloud. So what next in council? What do we work on for you? Digital transformation, as I mentioned, we're doing lots with Lake Macquarie. We're also doing lots with our education customers about how to put more and more information in front of your patrons or clients or members, whatever you might call them, and where to put it. So you'll have library portals. But is that integrated into the council portal? Or if you're a school, do you go to one place to access information or perhaps step through to the library system, as well as see attendance information and finance data? So really lots of exciting stuff there, and how we can use technology to automate what we do to make things simpler, easier and more cost effective for everybody. And then finally, support. So we've got to really continue to invest in both elements of our support, so hosting your environment, making sure we continue to be secure and we continue to take on those technological advancements that are presented to us, and also concentrating on our help desk. So we've made big investments in the last year of adding more and more people onto our help desk, and we now have a combined desk of about 14 or 15 staff. But we really got to concentrate on the knowledge of those people and the processes to answer your queries, so we just continually enhance your service. On the wider Civica for the last year, again, really, really good year. Increased by about 900 people globally, and we're quite proud to say most of that growth actually came from Australia. So that was really good. We won a big contract in Victoria to issue fines and infringements. So a lot of people in Victoria are not so happy with us, but we don't do it here in Sydney. So, and yeah, really good growth. Probably looking forward, it's just a continuation of what we've been doing the last number of years. So it's expand locally and put local experts on the ground, but also leverage the size of the group. So, you know, increasingly we've got more and more capacity in India. So when perhaps Kevin, who leads our libraries development team, needs to undertake a specific project, he's able to quickly and very cost effectively add a number of people into his team to complete that project. So, you know, the home of libraries development stays in Melbourne, but if we take on a really big piece of work, we're able to really add extra developers into the project really quickly. So that's pretty much it from me. The last thing to do is introduce our keynote speaker, Marshall Breeding. Many of you will have heard of Marshall. He's an independent consultant, speaker, and author, and perhaps, you know, front of mind for most people is the creator and editor of the Library Technologies Guide and also libraries.org. So it's the second time he's been with us on one of these sort of trips. The last time was about 5 years ago, so we've enjoyed sort of catching up with many of our team, having met him before and also having the chance to show him what we've been doing with Spiders. So without further ado, I'll introduce Marshall, and thank you again.
So I'm delighted to be here. It's always great to be in Sydney. It's always a great city to visit. So I want to talk to you today about kind of some of the work that I do in the realm of library technology and kind of tracking the data and trends of the industry, and some of the kind of trends that I'm seeing kind of in the public library space, but others as well. So how many here are from a public library of some sort? Most, but not all. How many are here from an educational institution, college, university, TAFE? Okay. Okay. And government special libraries. Okay. So mostly public, but a few others. So I'll try to remember to include observations that are helpful to all of you. So I'm going to talk some, about the research that I do, a little bit about big data, how it leads to kind of concerns for privacy and security, social media, and those kinds of things. But to start off, I want to talk some about kind of how I spend my life. It's mostly surrounding collecting information in lots of different ways in the realm of library technologies, and most of that goes into my website, Library Technology Guide. So, I'm kind of in a really interesting position in the library automation industry where, I kind of follow this very narrow niche of, technologies, products, services, companies related to libraries, and there aren't a lot of other individuals that are kind of involved in the same way. So I kind of feel a lot of responsibility to be able to kind of collect information from different ways, different sources, and reflect it back to the library community as libraries think about kind of the technology systems that they need in their infrastructure in order to be able to support the work that they do. It's a big industry from the library point of view, though it's kind of small compared to kind of global companies. I did an exercise a few years ago where I kind of aggregated kind of all of the revenue that libraries spend for technology products, and that would include kind of library management systems, discovery systems, RFID, things like that, and it came out to be about $1.2 billion. So that from the library point of view sounds like a lot of money. Probably Amazon makes that much in a weekend. So I think it's important that libraries have as much information and guidance in how they spend, their kind of precious budgets in investing in library technology products. So I try to make as much of that information available as possible. So on some of the things that I do is that kind of every announcement that's made from one of these organizations, profit or nonprofit, that create software for libraries. All of those are available on my website, going back to like 1980s. Articles that I write, kind of other data that I collect is available in kind of a repository of textual information. Then I have this libraries directory that provides a lot of information, I hope, about the libraries that exist in the world, not all of them, but a lot of ones of interest, and the technology systems that they use and what they've used in the past. I track library management systems, discovery systems, link resolvers, and kind of the different pieces and parts that libraries invest in. I'll come back to that in just a minute. So every year since 2002, I've written this industry report that kind of captures, I hope, the major trends that are happening year by year in the library technology industry. As you can see, from 2002 to 2013, it was published by a publication called Library Journal, US-based, but has international readership. And you can see by the taglines that we assign to the articles that it kind of gives a feeling of kind of the different eras of automation. And in the earlier days, it's a lot about kind of evolution of legacy systems, kind of migration from one system to another, things that were important at that time. But I think a lot of the emphasis has shifted more recent years as kind of you look at kind of what I've been writing since 2014 for American Libraries. Again, American Libraries is the publication of the American Library Association, but the publication is available online, and I write the article from a global perspective as much as I can. You can see in recent years kind of bigger things have happened in the library technology industry that the shape of systems has changed considerably from kind of standard library management systems with the traditional modules to systems that have better ability to manage kind of the complex multi-format collections that libraries have these days, kind of this genre of library services platform I talk about quite a bit. And then from a business perspective, it's not just one company that offers an integrated library system or library management system buying a direct competitor, but it's technology systems and products and companies becoming part of kind of this top order of companies that offer a variety of products and services to libraries. So that would include companies like ProQuest, who purchased Ex Libris a couple of years ago, EBSCO, who a major provider of content and subject-based indexes and so forth, has launched the Folio open source project, in addition to other software as a service products that they've been working on in recent years. And even though I don't cover it quite as directly, think about Elsevier, which has really gone through a transformation in recent years from being just a publisher of scholarly and academic information. You read their press releases and they position themselves as a analytics and workflow company now. And you look at, kind of Scopus and Pure and kind of all these other products that are coming into their focus. It's not just the end result, it's the process of producing scientific research and literature that has changed with not only Elsevier, but you see the same kind of changes in Clarivate Analytics and kind of some of the other companies. So big, I could talk about that for an hour, but these are big changes that are happening recently in the content and technology space that libraries are immersed in. So going back to the libraries.org database, so this is a project that I began in about 1996 as a exercise. So a publisher wanted me to do a yellow pages of the World Wide Web in print. Kind of a ridiculous exercise then, but it would be unimaginable now, but it's a project they wanted me to do, so I did that, and a piece of that, I got other folks to do components of the book, and I did the libraries part of it, where I wanted to be able to reflect in that chapter all of the different libraries that had websites at the time. It was a pretty finite number. Maybe it was a few thousand. And so I kept that data and kept evolving it into the database that I have now. When I first launched it as an independent website, I called it LibWebCats. Probably the worst name I ever invented for anything. You know, there was already kind of LibWeb that was created by Thomas Dowling as a listing of all the websites in the world. There was one called LibCats that had all the library catalogs. I wanted to do both, so LibWebCats kind of made sense at the time, but not that long ago, a few years ago, I got the domain libraries.org, and I call it that instead. That's more what it is. It's all information about libraries that I can put together. So this is a database now of about 200,000 entries, and it describes, you know, not all libraries in the world. OCLC has done, when they were doing research for one of their projects, they mentioned that they considered there to be around 1.2 million libraries in the world. So that seems like a reasonable number to me. You know, there are a lot of really small libraries in remote parts of the world that I'll probably never have in my database. But 100,000 or two, I think, represents kind of the community of libraries that kind of has an economic impact in the technology industry, because that's kind of my main focus. It's not that small libraries that don't have automation systems aren't important to their communities. It's just that they're harder for me to find out about, and they don't have quite as much involvement in my area of research. So each entry has, you know, the fact that it exists, that it has an address, and so forth. And so I try to fill that out with additional information like its geographic coordinates in order to be able to do maps. And directly from my research, I then gather information from lots of different sources that say, well, what is the current library management system they're using? When did they implement it? What did they have before? And kind of the whole chronology of automation systems that they have. And, you know, discovery systems and so forth. It also has information like the size of their collection when I can get that data, what's their volume of circulation transactions. So all of that enables me to be able to kind of do analytics and reports and visualizations regarding a lot of the trends that are happening in library technology. So I do simple things like a map, show me all of the libraries in Australia. There are a few more than this. I have a lot of entries for libraries in Australia where I don't have their geographic coordinates. I need to go and catch up on that. New Zealand, well, we were there a couple of days ago. The first of our 5 cities in 5 days, 2 countries, and 6 time zone roadshow that we're doing here. Another example is I could call out all of the libraries running a given product. So did a query here to generate this map, show me all of the libraries that are using Spidus. So just examples of what you can do. And of course, all this can be done in lists, and I have other kinds of charts and graphs that you can use to do kind of comparative information. I don't think I have one in my slide deck here, but you could generate a report that says, well, if you're running Spidus, all the libraries running Spidus, what did they run before? So kind of what is leading libraries into a current system. So lots of things like that. It's just kind of, I believe in having a lot of data in order to be able to then examine the data and figure out what the trends are as part of the writing that I do. So the industry report that I mentioned earlier, one of the components of the data gathering of that is a questionnaire I send to the vendor community, these profit and nonprofit organizations that offer library software. So another project I do is where I ask libraries, well, what do you think of the system that you have now? Do you like the system in general? Do you like, how do you rate its functionality for managing your print resources, its functionality for electronic resources? Do you perceive that you have good support from the organization that provides it to you? And then I ask other questions. Are you thinking about changing systems? If you are, mention some of the ones that you're considering. So all of that kind of generates this perceptions report that I've been doing since 2007, which I hope is interesting. when I started doing this, I was aware of some earlier research where they were doing samples of like 30 or 50 libraries. And I said, if I'm going to do this, I need to have a large enough sample that I think the report would be more credible. So the first couple of years, it was in the 2000s, 3000s, 4000 is kind of what I'm working up to now. So once you have that many responses, not only are you looking kind of broadly, but more importantly, I'm able to kind of look at each segment. So if a large public library is using this system, what do they think of it? Which is much different than a very small public library using another system. Kind of the grading scale becomes completely different from one kind of library that might have relatively simple automation needs compared to those that kind of use every aspect of the system. Large and complex libraries, no matter how good the system is, there's always something wrong that day, right? So, those companies that serve these larger libraries get graded on a very tough scale, so it's not fair to intermix that with the small libraries that are using simple systems that are delighted that they can check out books at the service desk. It's a different thing. So this perception survey, I think, kind of reflects, I hope, the tone of the industry by those who use these products. The really interesting part are the narrative comments. If you're basically okay, you'll click through all the numerical things. Takes about 5-10 minutes to do. If you have something to talk about, you're either really happy or really upset, then those individuals will often write a few paragraphs in the comment section. So it's either highly positive or negative, and so it makes for good, interesting reading if you want to kind of hear the juicy parts of what people think about their automation systems. So anyway, I'll point you to that. The 2017 version of that report will be out shortly. I've closed the survey February 1st, and it's just now I've got to get caught up with kind of writing the report. I've got 2 other deadlines of things that I have due to publishers before that. The perceptions report is something that it's original publication on my website, so it's kind of self-published in a way. So I have deadlines no deadlines than the ones I impose on myself. Okay. So that's a lot of the work that I do in gathering information. And any questions or comments so far? Try to make it as interactive as possible. Okay. But so the next thing that I want to talk to are kind of some of the trends that I'm seeing in the research that I do, and as I have kind of wonderful opportunities to travel the world and kind of see how libraries work in different contexts and the technologies they use and the problems they face. I think I observe great differences as I go to kind of different regions of the world, even different parts of the United States, or maybe even different parts of Australia would approach libraries and what they do and how they do it in different ways. So I don't think that libraries are converging to be more alike. I think they're becoming more different over time. I see more differences between academic and public and special and national and state libraries. Those differences are kind of more profound over time. Whereas, a couple of decades ago, when all libraries were mostly dealing in collections that were print, there was a lot more commonality. How do you circulate print materials? How do you catalog them? But since that time, there's been pretty different paths of divergence among the different kinds of libraries. And then as I mentioned already, I see differences in international regions. A lot of it's based on resources available. If you're in part of the wealthier part of the world, then the technology that you can afford is quite different than where I was 3 or 4 weeks ago in India, where they're really relying on kind of open source systems and kind of whatever they can acquire in their very modest resources. That they have great talent and time, so open source kind of makes a good it's a good path for them, and they achieve kind of amazing things with it. But again, it's kind of a real difference you know, as I see in different parts of the world. So economic capacity, I think, is a driver, can be a limiter, can be a point of innovation. So, you know, when you don't have the resources, you kind of create solutions to the problems that you have. So what are some of the specific differences that I see among the different library types? So, you know, I spent a lot of my career working in academic library, and when I started, so in the science library, most of the footprint of that library were the ranges of periodicals that were used by the library users. It took up most of the library. So beginning about the 1990s or so, scholarly communications for, you know, scientific and professional fields changed entirely from being issued in print to being issued electronically. Today, most STEM libraries devote, almost all of the literature they acquire is electronic. I mentioned the other day that I was working on an article on something else related for an academic library, but one of the questions I asked, so you take your collections budget, what is the proportion of print to electronic and how you spend your budget? And it was 87-1, you know, electronic versus print. So, and I don't think that's unusual. When I talk to a lot of kind of large academic libraries, in wealthier nations, they are spending almost all of their money on subscriptions to electronic resources, and given the annual inflation of subscription prices, it means continued pressure on those budgets, often at the sacrifice of kind of any monographs at all. You know, ebook collections from some of the same providers, and then print monographs kind of based on specific requests from faculty members and students and so forth. So it's really changed the nature of academic libraries and therefore changed the nature of the technical infrastructure they need to support those libraries. So that's kind of a huge divergence from what a public library might see. Public libraries, I observe, continue to be thoroughly engaged with print resources. They spend most of their budgets on print monographs and magazines, journals, and newspapers that they put on the shelf, supplemented by some amount of spending on subscriptions to electronic resources and downloadable ebook platforms and those kinds of things. So, you know, I'm not aware of any public library that spends most of their collection budget on ebooks and electronic resources. And then national libraries have a whole different area of concern, like the state libraries, especially here in Australia, where they're charged, their mission is to kind of preserve the heritage and culture of the region. So a lot of hard work to do that, and investment in other kinds of technologies, building digital collections, especially oriented toward long-term digital preservation. So, you see the National Library of Australia, the National Library of New Zealand, kind of both leaders in the realm of digital preservation. The State Library of New South Wales here are doing a lot of work in that area as well. Okay. So, again, public libraries, and I hope I know I'm telling you what you already know, but, my observations are what I've said, that they're quite different than academic libraries, and they continue to have kind of vigorous circulation of print materials. When I look at statistics from various sources, and I'm not sure I have any statistics for Australian libraries, so you can tell me how this fits with your world, that in the US, especially the larger public libraries serving urban populations are seeing at least even, if not rising, numbers of circulation transactions year by year. Smaller rural public libraries, I think, face more challenges. They're at a lower level to begin with, but I think they have more challenges in kind of being able to kind of keep up with the volume of circulation. So there's interest in that. So that, I think, will continue. I am familiar with research from the Pew Internet Trust and other organizations that suggest that there's great interest in reading in print that is not declining. that there was a time where it seemed like there was a steady increase in interest in reading online and on ebooks and so forth, but it didn't keep going up. It's kind of plateaued a bit, and sometimes it's even seen some diminishment. And one of the areas of diminishment is reading by young people, that they mostly prefer to read in print. And it's the older demographics that read more online. And that kind of rings true. When I sit on an airplane and people are reading, you see people like me that might be reading on their tablet or Kindle or other electronic device, and the young folks are reading in print. So just kind of circumstantial, anecdotal evidence to support the trend that I think have been supported in larger research studies. So even though I don't anticipate a realm where public libraries are all digital, it doesn't mean that public libraries aren't going to be involved in digital offerings. There is a rising interest in having public libraries provide more access to ebooks, for example. And it's an important part of the service that I think that a public library wants to offer. The proportions vary. The statistic that I can remember off the top of my head, of course every public library might be different, is the Toronto Public Library. They're one of the largest libraries in North America. They report circulation statistics of physical materials in the 35 million range. I forget what the exact number is. But last year they had 4-point-something million digital downloads from Overdrive. So, it's not insignificant. It's a big part of what they do, and they make major investments in order to be able to support that service of making ebooks, audiobooks, and other kinds of digital media available through their digital presence to their users. And I think part of the complexity of public libraries these days is kind of being able to do both of those together in a really seamless and easy kind of way. I think and have a kind of comprehensive and seamless digital presence that covers a lot of the different things that public libraries are offering to their users. Okay. I think I'll come back to that again in a couple of slides. This kind of goes back to what I said earlier about a lot of the disparities that I see in public libraries in different contexts, that those that serve urban and rural areas have a lot more resources than those that serve kind of rural areas and small towns and so forth. So anyway, how do you kind of deal with those disparities and have more evenness of library service so that no matter kind of where an individual lives, they have kind of good access to the kind of resources they need in order to be able to kind of read what they want and learn what they need to learn in daily life. So I think this, I've said most of this already. I often kind of get ahead of my slides, so we'll just keep going. The other aspect of public libraries is, it's easy to think about technology and libraries through their website, but there's also a lot of technology that has to do with their physical establishment. How do you provide the tools for efficiency that you need so that your staff can spend more of their time kind of in face-to-face interactions with your customers and clients and less time kind of dealing with the rigors of getting books on the shelf and returning them and sorting them and all of that. So automated material handling, self-service is kind of in that arena. Another aspect that is maybe a little bit more experimental but innovative, are things that have to do with using technology to improve the engagement of your physical spaces. iBeacon, technologies like that, people counting, people sensing technologies so that you can kind of know, understand, and affect how users kind of interact with your physical spaces. To be able to have an exhibit, in a certain part of the library and see if they're visiting it is one question, and if they do, be able to help them interact with it. Maybe you can push a link to their phone that says, here's more information about that if you care to explore it more. So those kind of things, kind of advanced digital signage so that you're providing kind of more interactive information that helps guide those who visit your physical facilities to kind of a new level of interaction and engagement with your library. And I think that's what it culminates in, is how can public libraries, how can any kind of library kind of enhance the engagement and delight that the users have with the library in order to be not only to get great services, but to be great supporters of the library when it comes time to deal with kind of funding issues and volunteer issues and all those kinds of things, where you really rely on your community to kind of give back to the library so you can keep giving to them. So I'm not going to repeat any of this. But again, it's kind of a balancing act of kind of digital versus physical technologies in order to kind of further the work of libraries. Another aspect of technology is, how do you build the right collection for your users that isn't just kind of a single thing? How are you refining the collections that you put in each branch to ensure that it reflects the demographics, the languages, the ethnic groups and cultures in each individual branch, which might be different than others? So use a lot of kind of data and analytics in order to be able to acquire and deploy collections in the way that is specifically refined to each aspect of the library's physical presence and digital. So, the other aspect that I worry about in public libraries that's kind of been absent in traditional library management is this idea of customer relationship management. How, we know quite a bit about our patrons in a typical patron record, but do we know enough? Are we gathering enough information in order to be able to deliver personalized services and messaging and kind of other things that will kind of increase their interest and provide more, better and more excellent service to each category of user? So, this kind of personalization concern, pervades the e-commerce realm. How do we do enough of that in the public library context in order to improve our services? So, I think library automation systems, we call them in the US integrated library systems, here the library management systems, have evolved to have kind of great, mature, and rich functionality. How do you kind of take them to these next steps? I think it's important to have kind of conversations with companies like Civica to let them know what you're thinking about that you want in your next generation of technology. I think I want to kind of move quickly as the time clicks down. What do you want your public presence to be? What kind of discovery do you want to be able to offer your users and how they interact with your collection? I think that it's important to get beyond, just responding with lists of things in response to a query. That kind of basic relevancy keyword results is important, but how do you get beyond that? How do you emulate kind of the experience of serendipity that users experience in the library itself as they kind of interact with your physical shelves? They kind of come across stuff and kind of look around there, and they just stumble across things. So how do you accomplish that in the digital presence? More than just a call number browse. You should be able to find ways to feature materials that you anticipate might be of interest to your community members, and then kind of other ways of featuring materials. So lots of different issues there. And to have this digital branch that is delightful to use, that's easy to use, that has as little friction as possible when it comes to the different content items and services that are available through the library's website. Easy access to ebooks, point, click, download, and read, I think, is what ultimately we want to get to. And have it well integrated with the way that you provide access to print materials as well. We see this ongoing emphasis on digital lending services. How do we accomplish that behind the scenes and technically in a way that is a delightful and not frustrating experience. I think a lot of us can remember the early days of ebook lending where it was the dreaded 23 steps that someone had to go to in order to be able to deal with their first ebook. So we've seen a lot of progress in kind of ebook integration so that libraries are kind of able to nicely integrate all of that with their services. And it's got to be mobile or you're kind of nowhere, because increasing numbers of library users are using only their mobile phones in order to be able to access your services, so fully responsive and all of that. And quickly go through the last couple of slides, don't have a lot of time left, but an important value that libraries have is to be a safe haven for community members to be able to read anything they want with kind of an understanding of privacy, that others will not know what they've chosen to read. So we protect circulation records in that regard. What I suggest that we don't do a good job of is protecting that information as it's conducted on the web. A lot of libraries continue to use HTTP, sending all of this information, what a user searches for, what list they see returned, then what they select, read, and download. It really needs to be done in a secure way. My data shows that 10% of US libraries are actually doing that. So the more, I think catalogs are better. A lot of companies like Civica kind of enforce HTTPS as user search. So that's a good thing. Some do and some don't. And then using big data to the extent possible to be able to deliver personalized services, but in ways that don't violate our values for privacy and security, using as much anonymized information as we can and collecting personally identifiable information only when we're given permission to. So I think that I need to kind of wind down. Big data is a big interest of libraries. I could talk another hour on that. I'm actually working on an article on that. So, I think that we will kind of end here so that we can hand the podium over to the next speakers. So thank you.
Sorry, I'm not Simon. He had to race off. We'll have a quick Q&A if anybody has any, but also there's we'll be having a coffee break. So if you did want to speak to Marshall, then grab him and ask him the questions.
Okay, so I guess we have time for a question or two.
Yeah, take one or two.
Don't raise all your hands at once. Come on, I can't keep track. But someone ask a question.
Looks like you're off the hook, Marshall.
Okay, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks
I'll be around during coffee and all of that too, so thank you.
All right, thank you. I'd now like to introduce you to Professor Roberta Ryan and Sophie Bruce from the Institute for Public Policy and Governments at UTS. So they'll be doing a dual presentation. They were involved in the first Changing Landscape, that report that we did, and we'll put this in your bag, and they'll be unveiling the second report as well. So I'll hand over to you, Roberta.
Thank you very much. Right, slides up. Oh, look at that, it's all... No? Thank you. Somebody will do that for us. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'd like to add my welcome to you for today's session. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And I'd particularly like to welcome you to UTS. My name's Roberta Ryan and I'm the Director of the Institute for Public Policy and Governance, which is a very catchy title, as we've just heard, as well as the UTS Centre for Local Government. I'm going to step through just some of the kind of background to the work that we've been doing in the libraries area. It's an area that we find really, just endlessly interesting. I'm always very pleased to be doing work in the library space because who doesn't love libraries, A lot of the work that we do is not in areas that people find intrinsically attractive or interesting. The Institute for Public Policy and Governance, we're a generalist policy research centre. We work for all levels of government across, kind of every policy field that you can think of. But it is always our favourite work to be contemplating libraries and the role of libraries. And, we love libraries, and when I grow up, I always said I wanted to go and work in a library, and, it's really because I'd like to sit down and read books all day. But I know that that's, libraries are much more than that. But it's really when we engage with, people and citizens about what they value about libraries and how that's changed over the last sort of 10 to 15 years, it's a really important space, and it's not something I don't have to tell you people that, but I just always think it's terrific for us to have the opportunity to work in this area. The University of Technology, we're in the fabulous Gehry building. I'm unable to report that our office is not in this building as much as we'd like it to be. We're in the Tower building, which people will know is a terrific example of brutalist architecture. It looks much better on the inside than the outside these days. But look, the University of Technology, I've worked in most of the metropolitan universities in Sydney, and the University of Technology is, is everything that it says it is. For me, the university is really about making an impact. We do a lot of work in the applied space, and it's really about the application of technology that can make a difference in people's lives. The building program, as I hope you appreciate, has improved the physical appearance of this campus, and I hope you get the chance to walk along the goods line here, which is a terrific space, and it's been redeveloped, and I think it won an Urban Design Award. So it's a much more interesting campus than those of you that hang around in Sydney might be aware of. I also hope that you are able to join us after we finish here to take a look at some of the work that we do in the digital space, and the data arena is a really great fun, I want to say party piece. I think it's a party piece. It's a much more serious thing than that in terms of the big data capability that UTS is generating. But it's really a good show, so I please hope you can join us there. We've also done some quite interesting work in the library space as part of this campus, and not that I think if you go into the library building, you can't see that, but some of the storage work, it sits underneath what we call the green here, which is just behind this building. So UTS is in the business of trying to apply some of that leading technology in terms of the work that we do. The Institute for Public Policy and Governance is, as I said, a generalist applied research centre. We have a specialty in working with local government. About a third of our work is with local government. The other work we do is with other levels of government, often with state and federal governments who want to engage with local government around key policy reform areas. So we're currently doing a lot of work in social and affordable housing, and the disability space, the transformation around major policy reform. So any of that kind of work we do. Please visit our website and see the range of work that we do. We also have a master's program in applied policy, as well as a master's program in local government, which is the only one in the country, where we have an extensive short course program as well. We're very pleased to have this research partnership with Civica. It's a genuine exchange of ideas in terms of what we think are some of the emerging issues in the technology space for elements of the public sector. We're particularly interested as part of the work that we've just started, besides this libraries work that we're going to talk about today, in thinking about what digital transformation looks like for local government and trying to stimulate some of those conversations. So part of what we do is work to engage with local government, with libraries, with other sectors, to try and understand what the kind of research and practice needs are, and then take that away and trying to develop some research and disseminate and communicate that. So we're all the time exploring in our discussions with Civica about the kinds of research that we can do that might be of value to you. As I said, we've done quite a lot of work in the library space. We did a very significant project with State Library of New South Wales. I hope many of you are familiar with that. It's on their website as well as ours. We do every 3 years a piece of work about why local government matters, which is asking citizens what they value about local government. And of course, out of all the things that local government does, guess what they value most, which is libraries. No news there, of course. But it's sort of news to local government in a way that, that's got an interesting conversation that when you say out of all the things that, and this is a national piece of work, out of all the things that local government does, what is it that you most value? And it, of course, it's people know that local government does, the roads, rates, and rubbish story. But out of all the things that that citizens value about local government, libraries are right up there, and we track those things over time. It's also part of that research talked about the significance of local government as an enabler of issues and communicating what matters to communities, both to local government and other levels of government. And of course, libraries play an important role in that connection to citizens, and are often really a crucial interface space with communities for local government. You either go to the counter and pay your rates, which is something that doesn't happen so often these days, but the place that citizens interact with their councils is often the library space. And of course, the Civica work that we've done around the value of libraries as public spaces, of which the work we're talking about today is part of that. I wanted to just take a moment, because we don't want to stand here and talk at you all morning. Why don't you take the opportunity to talk to the person sitting next to you? I think you're all sitting, or the person behind you, and just take a moment to think about how it is what your library users want. You're all here from libraries, I think. I looked around before, different kinds of libraries. But how is it that you know what your library users want? So, of course, there'll be the interactions that you have, but we'll be interested in taking just a moment to have a conversation about that and then just share some of that with us. Right. Well, let's talk. Sophie's going to talk to you about the detail of this research, but we just wanted to, I'll just do a couple of slides in terms of positioning it, and then it'd be great to have a conversation with you and get your reflections on this. We were interested in this study to look at how online library spaces are experienced and valued in a digital age, and we were particularly interested in users' perceptions of the value of an engagement with online library spaces and digital services. And we asked library professionals like you about the challenges and opportunities in this area. Now, this was a fairly modest piece of research, and it's sort of thrown up some themes, I guess, that we can continue to look at. We did a desktop review. Kane, our colleague sitting here, did that work for us. We did a survey of users across libraries in Australia, New Zealand, Singapore and the UK. So one of the interesting things, I think, is some of the different perspectives. We did in-depth interviews with librarians and library managers, and we did a focus group with library professionals across the countries that we surveyed. From the desktop research, again, no news. Libraries remain at the centre of many communities. We know this from previous research that we've done, that libraries are, they're not cafes, they're free spaces, they welcome everybody. They're often at the centre of communities, and, they're much more than places where you borrow books. The online library service delivery requires high-performing infrastructure. That's a challenge, particularly in parts of Australia. And libraries as sort of hybrid spaces where they're linking both that physical and online, those physical and online components. And the new technologies such as AI and VR should be adopted by libraries. Libraries remain at the centre of many communities. They're that non-commodified space that I talked about before, and it's particularly important in the way that libraries reflect the diversity of the communities. There's a library near me where I live that has the most significant Russian language collection in Australia, and people in our neighbourhood, when I say that to people, they go, why is that? Because there's a lot of Russian speakers who live around here, and people are not aware often of how libraries at a very fine grain level reflect the specifics of particular communities. And it's particularly important. It's not just about, children, older people, young people, but it's about those particular interests. It's about the information you know about why people look at the things that they do. The online library service delivery has all sorts of opportunities, but it has all sorts of challenges, and it's that sort of uneven and uncertain delivery of infrastructure, particularly around the NBN. Poor provision reinforces that digital divide that we experience across a lot of areas that require that kind of infrastructure. And communities without access to high-speed internet will not be able to deliver the same kind of quality digital experiences. The focus of this research was really around this libraries as hybrid spaces and linking their physical and online components. And this is a new space for the literature to think about. It's a new area for libraries to be thinking about. And we were really interested in testing different perspectives of the kind of physical and online perspectives that people have around libraries. So, I'm very pleased to be here in Sydney and to be talking about this report, and we'd like to launch it today, so please take it home and have a read of it. I'd like to introduce Sophie now. She'll take you through some of the detail of the data, and then we'd love to have a conversation with you and get your reflections around that. So Sophie Bruce is the Programs Manager for us at the Institute. She works closely with Civica in trying to understand your needs and their needs and what kind of research that we can do to support that. So thanks, Sophie. I'll leave you those. Yep, sorry, we'll just change over our bits of paper.
Thanks, everybody. Roberta did mention Kane before, but I'd just like to introduce my colleague Kane Pham here who integral member of the research team, particularly on this piece of research. Thank you, Kane. So I'm just going to take you through some of the more detailed results from the survey findings and also from the interview and focus groups that we undertook as part of this research. And then I'm going to hand over to Mark Norman, who's the Manager of Libraries at Wollongong, who's going to talk a little bit more about digital transformation in his experience and in his libraries. So I'm going to go through a few kind of, data slides here. So apologies if you can't see it very well, but it is all in your report, so you can look at it in more detail at a later date. So the survey that we did, we were really particularly interested, as Roberta said, in how library users utilise online spaces and digital services. So when we did the first piece of research for Civica a couple of years ago, we talked about the value of libraries as public spaces, and we kind of had a few little questions in there that flirted around the area of digital space being a space as well. So we wanted to kind of understand that a bit further, and really wanted to understand the perceptions of the value of these spaces and what the experience is in engaging with these online spaces. And when we talk about online spaces, we're predominantly talking about the library website. We engaged with library users from across 4 countries, and the survey was facilitated through a Civica customer base. So many thanks to anybody here who helped administer this survey. It was sent out via a link, and we had a lot of people enter the survey, but we got about 600 valid responses. And as part of our ethics procedure, we couldn't include responses from people who are under 15, because that always takes us into a whole other ethics minefield. But it would be interesting one day to go down there, go down that rabbit hole and see what those go more into the data of young users. A bit of a kind of a caveat in terms of research limitations, because this survey was administered online and most people kind of went online to fill it out. We do assume a level of digital literacy from the people that responded. So we're aware of that. We're aware of the fact that the results reflect people who can actually engage with digital services, and it will be again interesting in the future to perhaps engage with users that aren't so digitally competent to see what their values and perceptions are as well. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of the survey findings in terms of the user values and perspectives and their preferences and experiences. So in terms of when we asked the respondents to rate how important they felt a physical library was compared to an online library or a library website, the interesting thing here is pretty much the same. So, you know, a very high proportion of these users rated both as equally important. 89 to 91% is the overall figures there. And similarly, they also visited those spaces at similar rates. So people were using physical libraries as much as they're using this online library space as well. So it's not an either or, it's an and in this case. When we asked how the users like to use online services and interact with librarians, you can see here that about 78% of respondents agreed that they're as happy to use online services as they are using services in a physical library. So there's a willingness there to use online services. Slightly less, so 68% are as happy to interact with a librarian online as they are face-to-face. So, you know, it won't come as any news to you that people prefer to interact face-to-face with librarians, but it also suggests that there could be some opportunity there in how you create virtual library assistants so that users can engage more online with that kind of librarian interface. So the takeaways for user values and perspectives is that online and physical libraries are equally important. Users frequently use both services, but there's a preference to interacting with librarians face-to-face. Now, during these slides, you'll see some quotation boxes. These are kind of direct quotes from survey recipients. There was an opportunity for them to provide feedback to some open questions and some nice perceptions coming back from there. So this one in particular, library should be a free space, a place for all of the community to learn and grow, and that applies both to physical and online spaces. So I'm going to take you through some of the results on the importance of features of an online library space. So again, it's not anything that will be new to you, but I think the sort of the advantage of having this kind of survey data to use is it's a good sample base, and it gives you a bit of evidence-based data to go back and advocate for services. So the most important features of a library website for our users was they wanted it to be very easy to use, they wanted it to remain free to use, and be able to work on a range of devices. Ease of access from their digital devices, being able to read and access content was also rated very highly. This table is kind of a bit upside down. The ones at the bottom are the ones that have the most kind of agreement levels with. So it's those access and being able to read and access content, which is rated most highly here. Users expect a similar range of services from online libraries that they get with physical libraries. They want to be able to borrow and read ebooks, they want to be able to use their library account online, and they want to have access to digital research databases. We also asked a question around what users rated best in terms of ease of access in online and physical libraries. And it won't, again, be any surprise that users perceive books and personalised assistance, going to workshops, as easier to access in a physical space, whereas referencing information and newspapers are easier to access online. But what I think is interesting about these results is that if you notice the grey bars, that's where the recipients said they didn't actually find it any different. So there is actually a real willingness there to access either service, a service in either way, either online or physical. So an interesting point there in terms of, again, not necessarily assuming that there's a preference for either or. So the takeaways for features of online libraries: ease of use and access. Library websites provide better research and reference services, and physical libraries are better social and recreational spaces. And again, a couple of nice quotes there from some of the recipients. In terms of interfaces and technology, Almost 30% of respondents said that their library website has links to all of the other services they need, which is so there's a bit of work to be done there, potentially with the library websites linking to other facilities or other community services. Local galleries, museums and educational providers were the most cited services that users would like to see linkages to on online library websites. From the feedback, it was suggested that library websites need to deliver better user experiences for members, and obviously investment in new technologies will help libraries keep up with user expectations in this way. Users were asking for a simple experience, a simple menu, better integration with other services, and utilising different types of technology. A little bit about social media. That's an interesting one for libraries. So a lot of our respondents access online library spaces through social media, and Facebook and Instagram were the most popular social media platforms. And we did ask an open question around how libraries might use social media in a better way or a different way to engage with their users. And there was a lot of responses to this. It generated a lot of enthusiasm through the survey recipients. And social media is regarded as an opportunity to enable interactions between libraries and users, and also between kind of different community groups in terms of a membership user base. There was a strong request for a more active or two-way engagement from libraries that went beyond reposting information or announcing events online. So there was a want to be able to interact more. And libraries are encouraged to use different communication styles to interact and engage with a wider audience. I guess the other suggestion was that it would be better to use social media less and more effectively than a lot and not so effectively. So, rather than do ad hoc reposting, actually use it wisely and more effectively. And I guess it's quite heartening that some of the recipients really understood that libraries are under a lot of pressure in terms of resources, and social media is one of those areas which is particularly time-consuming and draining on resources and requires a particular level of expertise. So there was an awareness there that was an area that was, perhaps a strain on libraries. So again, maybe the less is more approach would be better in that case. So most users do engage with social media, and social media growth could be leveraged to better engage with communities. So just finally with the survey, we did a bit more around how satisfied people were with library spaces in terms of online and physical spaces. And the interesting thing here is that 85% of respondents were satisfied with the physical library, yet this falls to kind of 61% satisfaction with the online library experience. So when you remember the first kind of slide I showed you around the importance of libraries, a high level of respondents rated both online and physical as almost equally important. But the fact that the satisfaction levels goes down suggests there's more work to be done with the online experience. We did a bit more analysis on this library user satisfaction area, and through some kind of canny mathematical equations that the data people have done, the user satisfaction is most influenced by easy access to the online library, being able to find relevant information and being able to read on devices. So if you're thinking about what is going to raise the level of customer satisfaction with their user experience online, they're the areas to focus on rather than some of the other areas. So in terms of the survey results, I guess the takeaways that we've come up with in terms of what the users are suggesting is that the experience of the online library has not matched the experience of the physical library as yet, and this is obviously something that was picked up in the literature review that we did also. And users are anticipating a more seamless experience of libraries in the future. They want more user-friendly experiences with better access, readability and integration, particularly when you compare to commercial services and platforms that they're used to. Many of the respondents asked for an easier interface to use, and they also suggested a stronger engagement with the libraries would be beneficial, and requested more digital interaction. So, there's a suggestion there that redesigning library interfaces could be more socially focused and use social media to engage with the communities more. So that's a bit about the survey results. I've hit you with lots of data there. Are there any questions about the survey results before I move on to the lucky library people? As I said, some of the results are there in the report that you'll take away. I think it's really useful as a reinforcement tool for things that you may already know, may already be aware of, but they're those, you've got it here as a piece of data now. So any questions? So love engaging with librarians. Always have fantastic conversations with library perspectives. Again, a lot of the perspectives and perceptions that we gathered for this research are conversations that are already being had out there. So I guess this is a way of capturing some of those themes and some of that thinking in a way that kind of collectivizes it in one hit. So we had a series of one-to-one interviews with library professionals from across the different countries, and also an international focus group, and asked for their perspectives on the challenges and futures of online library services. Again, the research caveat here is these participants were selected from a Civica library customer database, so we're not saying that they're representative of every single library manager or library staff member in the world, but I think it provides a nice kind of sample group to give us some good data. So just 3 slides on this one. So the first kind of big area I wanted to talk about in terms of what came out of these discussions and conversations was there definitely is perceived to be a time of change for libraries in this push to having a greater online presence. And there is this kind of continuum of between a physical and an online library. It's like, and different libraries are on a different kind of level in terms of where they're at on this continuum. The kind of the big question, the killer question that we asked was what's driving the change? What are the forces for change? What is the push towards this more online kind of service and the more online space that you have in libraries? And a whole range of different forces were at play that came back from our interviews in the focus group. I guess that the assumption that it comes from users or comes from citizens is not necessarily the case, because in a lot of cases users don't know what they don't know, so they don't know that what's possible in an online space, and it's not until that they're shown that they think that they do want this. So it's not necessarily being driven by library users. What is very clear is that in this kind of time of change, people who work in libraries are now juggling a range of activities. They're maintaining physical collections and spaces, they're developing online interfaces, they're raising awareness of new services, and they're educating users in new digital processes. And it can be difficult to navigate all of those things all at once. And there's a perception there of not feeling in control and needing to kind of build capacity for change and resilience. And also being on that learning journey along with their customers. We also asked questions about what librarians found the main challenges to be in this move towards a more online experience for their users, and how they move towards digital services. So, because we're researchers, we always like to do a little bit of the on-the-spot research. So I'm going to give you, as Roberta did, another minute or two to have a quick powwow with the person next to you, and just share what you find to be the most challenging things about moving towards a more digital library in your library area. So a couple of minutes. Go. So a lot of the challenges that you've raised definitely came up through the interviews and the focus group as well. Shrinking resources, poor infrastructure, budgets being halved, investing in online services, resources being expensive, interface and product difficulties, complicated products that from vendors where interfaces don't quite fit. Competing with commercial platforms, as you've raised, so there's an expectation out there of, of ease of use of the Googles of the world. Cost shifting. A lot of our interviewees talked about the fact that a lot of government services now are being put online, and so people come into the libraries to use the websites to fill out their Centrelink forms, and the library manager then has to be an expert in doing that. So there's a bit of cost shifting going on there. Understanding the needs of users, which was raised before, trying to work out how what people really want and how their behaviours are going to be, and managing change. That came up with staffing, and some of the respondents kind of suggested that there was a resistance to change from staff as well, because staff are used to doing things in a certain way, and having to change towards a digital mindset. There was a resistance to that in some way. Now we're going to go on to the opportunities. So a quick 1-minute powwow with the person next to you, and it might be flipping some of those challenges. But what are the opportunities for you then? What are the opportunities out there in transforming to a more digital online service in your library? Let's get optimistic. So again, very similar things came up through our research. Partnerships and collaborations were definitely seen as an opportunity, but they had to be with the right type of people. And collaboration is one of those great words that sounds brilliant in theory, but there is a reality to collaboration. It has to be around the same kind of business model. Innovation. Absolutely looking to what other people are doing, what other libraries are doing, and pushing for a better user experience in that. Innovation also comes from engaging with users. So we did a piece of research last year which was on co-design, in terms of co-designing kind of digital services, and that's a real kind of interesting area to engage in terms of understanding your users as the experts. So library members are the experts of the digital space, and what do they know? What can they bring to you? Which kind of goes in tandem with new service delivery models. Professional development, yes, whilst some staff may kind of feel that they don't have the expertise, that means that there's an opportunity for training and development in that area, and that kind of cultural shifting, and work in new ways. And also putting digital into leadership and strategy. So there is, definitely a perceived need for leadership of councils, leadership of government agencies, to put digital as a stream, its own strategy stream, not as an add-on. So that when you're pushing towards digital services, there is a definite vision and outcomes in mind with that. So lots of opportunities seen there. I think one of the sort of nicest kind of little interactions we had with one of our interviewees, or from the focus group, I can't remember which, was the suggestion that perhaps library staff are too nice. And they're not very good at pushing what they need. This was, not losing the niceness, but having a more kind of digital focus, because you really want to remain relevant in what you do. So just finally, a bit of future gazing. We asked both the survey respondents and the library staff what they felt the library of the future would look like. And three main kind of things came up. One was it being this hybrid space that connects the physical and online space. It's a hybrid space. I had a fabulous little conversation with my 12-year-old son the other day when he was asking what I was doing this week, and I was trying to explain what I was doing. And as soon as you try and explain to a child what you're doing, that kind of gets you like right down to the level. And I was talking about, online spaces and library spaces. And he said a really, really interesting thing, out of the mouth of babes. He said, but a website's just like another room in the library, isn't it? And I said, yeah, absolutely. It's just another room in the library. So I thought that's kind of, he should be doing this report. Greater engagement and co-design opportunities with the community, and collaboration with vendors, industry partners and government. So, lots of suggestions around it being a hybrid service, but also just engaging with the communities that you serve, whether it's physical or digital, just wanting to connect with people in the ways that they needed to be connected with. So, yeah, fabulous that this report's out. You've got it all today in your packs. You get the first looks at it this week. It hasn't gone out to the wider library network or our wider kind of networks until next Monday. So I'd like to hand over now to Mark Norman, who's just going to talk a bit about his experience with digital transformation at Wollongong, and then we're going to have a break, and then we're going to go to Jeremy, who's going to introduce you to the new Spiders update. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks for the opportunity to speak to you about what we've been working on at Wollongong. It's nothing you're not all doing, because we steal quite a lot of what we read about what you are doing. But I just thought I could talk about what's happened here at Wollongong over the last 3 years, and how we've looked at our spaces, our customer needs, our staffing. So if you don't know where Wollongong is, we're about an hour south, unless you're in peak hour. It was 2.5 hours this morning to get here. It's a beautiful place in New South Wales, and Australia has a lovely bridge which we close about 8 o'clock at night to keep out the riffraff. So we're the 4th largest city in New South Wales, the 10th largest in Australia, an estimated population of 211,000. And we have 7 libraries. So it's a very narrow local government area, just south of the National Park, then right down to Dapto, and you can see how our libraries are spaced there, with the main library in the centre of Wollongong. So we found that our previous library strategy finished in 2015, and we needed to work on a new strategy for 5 years through to the end of our community strategic plan in 2022. So we started that in 2015, and like most councils, we lost 2016 due to the planned amalgamations and mergers, and it was really static state. We just planned for what might happen. So all vacancies were frozen, budgets were frozen, and 12 months was spent on getting ready for day one, which in the end for us didn't happen. So it really was a lost year. So we thought, well, what is going to be in our strategic plan, and why should we engage and collaborate with our community in working on that? Talking to a colleague who was in an amalgamated council service, she was told, you need a strategic plan now, we're a new council. And she said, okay, well, let's start getting some engagement programs built in, talk to staff, talk to community. No, you've got a week. That's not necessary. Terrible situation to be in. I mean, what really is going to be the value or the perception about that strategic plan? So people did say, well, why are we doing this? It's going to take some time, and we do know what they want anyway, don't we? I'm not going to read all the quotes because I know you're all very literate, and as library staff, you just read books all day long. So I think if I was going to have a career change, I'd like to come back as a futurist, because you can say whatever you like, and sooner or later someone forgets what you said, and more often than not, a bit like the weather at night, it doesn't happen. So I'm not sure what Mr. Bodnik is up to now, but he really did predict only 6 years ago that we would not be here. So over the next 5 years, what does our community want from their library? So we spent a long time engaging through lots of activities, which many of you just mentioned a few minutes ago. Over 690 with face-to-face activities, 430 viewed the project online, 200 submissions on paper. We went to citizenship ceremonies, workshops, schools, within the libraries, out to community events. So we had a very large turnout from community and their responses. It was the highest response to any community engagement project Wollongong Council had done, apart from which beaches should be leash-free for dogs. So I think that might tell you something about Wollongong. And this shows you a pictogram of how we got that feedback in all the various ways that we engaged. We spent about 8 or 9 months working on that. And I'll give you some examples of staff feedback, and please don't take it as a criticism of staff, because they all have a different viewpoint, they all have a different life experience. And the previous slide or two where I said, why are we needing to ask the community? We know what they want, don't we? And when we talked about how long this engagement process would be and how much time we would spend, the questions from quite a few people is why? We know what they want. But everything we were planning to do from the strategy, we had to take to our executive and council, and we needed to say, this is what the community is asking for. It's not us saying, we think this is a good idea. We've talked about how important collaboration is. I really like collaborating. I like working with people and sharing my ideas with them, getting their ideas as well. I think it's a great idea. As long as I get what I want in the end. So I really like Ellen's quote here, and I've kept that for quite a long time, because it does take time, and you do have to put a lot of energy, and there's a lot of toing and froing. But I do believe in the end result is better than one or two people sitting in their office producing a strategic plan in a week. So what did we find? When we engaged our community, they started to talk about going beyond books, and they imagined the library of the future, and they helped us write the library's next chapter. So our strategic plan has 5 goals. There's nothing earth-shattering here. I'm sure you all have very similar goals, a vision statement and a purpose. So they wanted the libraries to be their place, libraries to inspire creativity and innovation, encourage community well-being, inclusion and cohesion, collect and share local stories, and a gateway for lifelong learning. I'm sure that's in quite a lot of your strategic plans, but this came from our community who wouldn't have read any strategic plans. So what did they want? They wanted physical materials, digital resources, staff assistance with research, study and learning, online tutoring and learning services, and technology training, just as we've spoken about this morning. Dating was interesting. We weren't expecting dating, and it came up more than once that libraries are a safe place. Dating online is not safe. Wouldn't it be great if we could have some kind of activities where people could actually meet others and run a dating service? We haven't gone that far yet, but out of Thirroul Library we did have a couple who became married and invited staff to the wedding. So it does happen, but we haven't explored setting up a dating service. Of course, more access, 24/7 access. So some of our community had been at uni and knew that they could get 24/7 access to labs. Why can't you do that to your library? We have a growing homeless people in our community. How do we relax the rules so that they can borrow? Please show us 3 forms of ID. Please show us your power bill, your telephone bill, and your rates notice before you can join. Well, it doesn't quite work. And a sense of community. People wanted to see all ages interacting together. Some libraries already have customer services in their libraries. We're looking at it with refurbishing 2 of our libraries, what role customer service will have, because our LGA is quite narrow to get down to Wollongong, where customer service is at the moment, is a bit of a drive for people. Every library has an interactive kiosk where they can talk to a customer service person, talk about their DAs, or talk about their neighbour's barking dog. But having a physical presence in the library is something that our community wanted. They wanted art exhibitions, one-off events, more libraries closer to their location. So we looked at physical materials and looking for some quick wins. So we put into a service where customers can tell us what to buy, so demand-driven acquisitions. So working with our supplier, customers can go into our library website, choose the genre that they like to read, and on a carousel, the supplier has loaded all the pre-pub covers and blurb, and they can vote for the book that they want us to buy. And that goes straight to the supplier to put the order in. It's pretty smart. They can only vote 1. They can't skew the results. and we're just working on them getting an email now saying, thanks for your recommendation, you were the first person to recommend it, would you like to be the first person to read it, and which library would you like it delivered to, so we know where to actually place that book. They wanted more libraries closer to where they live. Well, that's just not going to happen. We have 7 libraries and it's unlikely that we'll get more, and there's possible pressure that we should possibly have less. So we looked at the Libraries Everywhere project, which is based on the Little Free Libraries. So we set up 9 book boxes or Little Free Libraries across the city, and we stock them with discards to start with, but now we very rarely need to top them up. The community are topping them up with their own materials or returning the books back to those book boxes. The community said they wanted one-off special events, so we had a Book to Baton concert to celebrate 70 years of library service in Wollongong, and the theme was music from films that were based on great books. So it gave the mayor a chance to talk about what great service the library provides, and we've got a book collection and a music collection and a DVD collection. We got great publicity from it. About 450 people turned up. We had professional musicians, and it was a huge success, both publicity-wise and for the community. A not-so-quick win is to continue to build on our Comic-Con Festival, which has been going for about 7 years, so it's probably one of the biggest comic events run by public libraries in New South Wales. Last year we had over 10,000 people attend on the Saturday, and it's a big project. It's our biggest public event that we run, and we have a team from across all of the libraries spending about 9 months preparing for Comic-Con. 19th of May this year if you want to come. They want technology training. So a not-so-quick win was, well, how are we going to do this, because we don't have space? And it came out through practically every community engagement. We need to know more about technology. I can't use my smartphone. My kids gave me a tablet for Christmas and then went away and left me with it. I can't keep up with my younger children, but how can we do this? So we looked at our reference collection, and we weeded heavily from 27 plus thousand to 12. And in the main library, the first floor traditionally was known as the reference floor, and the ground floor was called the lending library. And so we needed to change that. And we even had staff who weren't allowed to work on the reference floor unless you were degree qualified with X number of years experience. This was a huge change. And so for staff who had worked there for a long, long time, this was quite harrowing, that the reference collection was seen as the biggest reference collection outside of the State Library. A lot of time and money was invested in it, and now we're going to seriously look at reducing it so we could find space. So this was the reference collection on the first floor. It was cut in half almost so that we could put in a lot of public access technology. That gave us some study rooms. Then we looked at the local studies collection, moved that to the back of the PC, so reduced reference even further, and that meant we could put the lab into where the local studies collection has. So we were really aiming to have just space that we could do anything in, that we could move things around, that we could have different activities going on. So when we were thinking about the lab, this is the kind of thing we were thinking about. Wouldn't it be really cool? Wouldn't it be like a coffee shop? Wouldn't it be like a bar in the background? I think it is. Wouldn't we have lots of experiments? And this is what we got. But it is a very flexible space which we can divide into two, and with a successful grant application to the State Library, we bought laptops and tablets and sewing machines and virtual reality and 3D printing machines. So we have a range of technology opportunities here, and we're partnering with community groups such as Salvation Army, community colleges, to run sessions for people who need technology training. We have high youth unemployment in Wollongong. We have BlueScope Steel shedding staff. A lot of those staff have been in those jobs all of their life, have not had to write a resume, use a computer, have any interview skills. So we are really looking at running these kinds of courses and sessions for our community. And we can run 2 at a time or open it up and fit 50 people in there. So what happened in Wollongong in libraries in the last financial year? Well, we had that many members, which is a slight increase. Physical increases, not that good. It's pretty static state. So our e-visits. Physical loans, pretty static, it's just a minor dip. E-loans, still going up. But as Marshall mentioned, not what was predicted 5 years ago, that it was really going to kill our physical loans or kill the need for a physical collection. That's not the case. And when I left academic libraries about 9 years ago, the budget was 70% physical and 30% online. Catching up with a colleague about 5 years ago, it was 70% online and 30% physical, and Marshall is saying it's almost all online now. Wi-Fi is a huge service for us, and it just keeps booming. So people do come in because they don't have access at home. People say that everything's online, so it's the death of libraries. Well, 25% of our population has no internet at home or really poor ADSL. And we do, from north to south, do have different communities with different financial capabilities. And the further south we go, the more impoverished the communities are. So Wi-Fi is really important. Access to the computers hasn't dropped off. So we've only just started using the lab, and so there's a slight increase in our training sessions, but more people can now fit in because we've got space to dedicate to that. But we've started to put more emphasis on events and programs, which is what the community said they wanted us to have. And we put more emphasis on social media, so we've put a team together to really focus on our digital content. And because Google is pretty good, whether we like it or not, our reference questions are dropping. So what do you see from those stats? What was one thing that you might have seen, or from the feedback from the customers? Not one customer said, we want more books. Not one. And yet when we had staff workshops about what do you think might be in the strategic plan, and we've got to build a collection, and you've really got to fight against the collection budget being cut, and our collections are terrible. There wasn't one request for more physical collection. And I think that was a surprise to a lot of people because they're still thinking that it's just about books. So how did we deliver these services? Well, this is what we looked like 3 years ago. We had 4 teams: client services looking after lending, reference, children's, youth, home library, interlibrary loans would have been there. We had local studies looking after client services, cataloguing, acquisitions. We had a typical technical services team for acquisitions and cataloguing, and we had a small systems and IT team. So once the results came back from the community and we started forming the strategic plan, we saw that we couldn't deliver on what they wanted with this kind of structure. We needed more people to be in programming and events. Customers were happy with our physical services and our physical collections. So we now changed to this structure. So information services and local studies are really our front-facing staff and services for people who walk into the library or access our services online. And we've tried to bring together as many of the staff and the services that actually go out or bring people in for services other than transactional services. So we have children's and youth and adults, we have digital services looking after marketing, social media and online, and outreach looking at our called Indigenous home library customers and our volunteers. So we can't offer all of these services without volunteers, and there's a huge amount of work in managing volunteers, particularly if you have an HR division who says we don't want to know volunteers, you take care of them yourself. So writing the policies and the procedures of how do you work with the volunteers, and sometimes they don't work out. How do you ask a volunteer to leave? You know, it's all fairly structured when we have discipline issues with our own staff, but what happens with a volunteer? We didn't have any of that, so we've spent a year trying to get our volunteer service mapped out so that we can work with that. We looked at collection services, so we've outsourced practically everything now. So the serials and collections team, cataloguing and quality control to make sure the outsourced services match our standards, and local studies cataloguing has moved from the local studies team. Look, I kind of agree with Steve Jobs' statement here. I didn't really know. I wanted my 600 CDs in my car so I could choose any one I want, but I didn't know how that would happen. We got the iPod and I'm as happy as can be. But a lot of times people do know what they want, and we found the community did know what they want and told us about it. So what did we learn from this? We learnt that the community really wanted to be involved in planning the library services. They wanted more than books. They wanted to participate in learning and recreational programs. And despite libraries being early adopters of change, there are still some sacred cows that raise tensions. So consult, consult, consult.